Don't settle for bad socks. Get comfort and grip at an affordable price with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Choose from 18 different colors at puregripsocks.com.
This is the ultimate 2024 speed boot tier list. Because as great as it is to try to rank them, I think rankings can be misleading in the sense that when you rank something as the lowest, it is inevitably viewed as the worst. And realistically, in 2024, when you're talking about top-end speed boot options, there really isn't a bad one. So with that in mind, here's how I would break down all the latest speed boots between S tier, A tier, and B tier. With almost all of these boots, by the way, being available below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the links down below. So if you are interested in some new speed boots, check those out and save yourself a bit of money. And really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy the tier list videos, don't forget to drop a like on this one and make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. Starting with a pair of boots that Lamine Yamal dominated the 2024 Euros in, the laceless Adidas F50 Elite, which I think when you're talking about speed boots in general, they're fantastic all around, especially if you're into the whole laceless thing. However, when it comes to ranking football boots that are all pretty good, you have to talk about the strikes against it. And while Yamal performed extremely well in these boots, it also is worth noting that his pair were very likely custom made to the specific shape of his feet, where with a laceless system and an off-the-shelf football boot, you just don't have adjustability. So while I do think these fit particularly well for a laceless design, you're not going to have the same lockdown and of course adjustability that would come along with the same F50 Elite that of course does have a lacing system. With that in mind, the touch is great, the boots are lightweight. Obviously the traction of the F50 isn't quite as aggressive as other speed boots currently on the market, but I think a lot of people like that. And at $260, it's not necessarily overpriced in the grand scheme of how much you can pay these days for a pair of football boots. For all of those reasons, I think the laceless F50 Elite is a B tier football boot. The New Balance Furon V7 Plus Pro is definitely one of the less popular speed boots of 2024, but that doesn't take away from how good they actually are. And given that they retail for $215 from a value for money perspective, there's definitely a lot to like about these if budget is of concern. What's great about the V7 Plus Pro is how light the overall construction is. I love the knit base material that you have for the upper. It's super soft, it's super thin. It's obviously very unique in terms of how it laces up, being pushed so drastically to the lateral side of the foot, which gives you a little bit of almost like a power boot-esque striking element with no laces in the way whatsoever. The traction is super aggressive, and that is very similar to what Nike was doing on the Mercurial series in the 2016 era or so with the Vapor 11 and Superfly 5. It also features a very responsive sole plate and is also available in both the regular as well as wide fit variations. So for somebody with really wide feet that still wants to wear a pair of speed boots, this could definitely be a fantastic option. Where I don't fall in love with it is in the overall shaping. It just doesn't work with my foot type quite that well, and I don't find them as comfortable as a lot of the other speed boot options, but of course your mileage may vary when it comes to that type of thing. And in terms of an overall standout feature, while it's very well rounded, I don't think there's any one thing about them that makes them feel that unique compared to other boots that would make me choose them over all the other options. So for that reason, it's a B tier speed boot. The Adidas F50 Plus is, simply put, one of the weirdest football boots on the market, but also in the best way possible. What makes them so unique and obviously different from all the other F50 Elite variants is the sole plate tech, where you'll notice that there are Lightstrike Pro inserts directly underneath the forefoot that elevate the forefoot quite significantly, really putting you on the balls of your feet or on your toes, which do change the experience in a way that you really won't find from any other football boot on the market, although not in a way that I would say is hard to get used to. It actually feels a lot more normal than I was honestly expecting, and to go along with that elevated forefoot with the foam for that extra responsiveness, which may or may not come from the foam itself, but definitely does come from the double sole plate construction, where you'll find that the forefoot is significantly stiffer and much more springy than what you're going to find from from just about every other football boot on the market, other than one, which also features some pretty unique technology. This, if you like that responsive sole plate feel, is pretty much as good as it gets. However, for that technology, it does come at a premium. The F50 Plus retails for $300, which is obviously not cheap, and is also only available in a laceless upper construction. So the fact that you have a super responsive sole plate paired up with the less responsive variation of the new F50 upper is a little bit of a confusing thing for Adidas to put out. If this had laces, it would shoot up the tier list, but as it is right now, being kind of a mishmash of features that ultimately does still fit and feel quite good, the F50 Plus is B tier. I get it. You probably don't want to wear a pair of Skechers football boots, and I don't necessarily blame you, but if you can get past the fact that these have a Skechers S on them, the Razor, whether it's the original or the newer 1.5, which is just a name change by the way, is a fantastic pair of football boots at a relatively fair price compared to the more popular competition at $225. What you're getting is one of the more comfortable speed boots on the market from the Razor with a great insole, great overall fit, a tight fit that's not overly tight, if that makes any sense. I love the synthetic material they've used in the forefoot. It's thin, but not overly thin. It has a little bit of that kind of hybrid touch feel that you might get from something like an Adidas Predator or even the messy variation of the F50 Elite. You have a knitted one-piece enclosure, you have a textile through the midfoot that gives you great overall lockdown and responsiveness with the laces tied tight. It features an underrated super responsive sole plate, really aggressive traction that mimics very closely what you'll find on the New Balance Furon as well. Again, very much like what Nike was doing on the Mercurial series back in 2016. And again, there's very little about them that I can honestly fault. If you like that thin, structured speed boot feel and experience, but typically find that comfort tends to be an issue, the Skechers Razor might not be a bad option, which is why it's A tier. The Puma Ultra 5 Carbon is the football boot that I honestly never thought we would get, simply from a cost perspective. And obviously these aren't cheap football boots with a retail price of $290, but all things considered, for the full, truly functional carbon fiber sole plate that you're getting on these football boots, it might actually be worth the price tag if you love the idea of having that kind of stiffer, super responsive, almost track spike feel underfoot, because the responsiveness of this sole plate matches up to what you would get from something like the F50 Plus, but in a much more low profile platform in that it's just super thin carbon fiber. The comparison that so many people want to make is when Nike was doing their Elite Series football boots. Obviously the Mercurial Superflies also had those carbon fiber sole plates. Those are nothing like what Puma have done here. This is truly functional carbon that really does feel completely different from any other football boot you've had on your feet. Not to mention the shaping, I think they've absolutely nailed. The upper is super thin, giving you that raw barefoot feel. The texture on the surface provides additional grip on the ball that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And the sole plate paired up with this super aggressive stud pattern makes for some of the craziest traction you're going to find on firm natural grass playing surfaces. They're very expensive and definitely unique to the point where I wouldn't say that they're for everybody, but again, if you like that really structured feel to your football boots, something that is as responsive as possible, you're really gonna like what these have on offer. The Ultra 5 Carbon is A tier. The Sokito Scudetta is the new kid on the block, but based on how they fit, feel, and perform, you certainly wouldn't know it. Where realistically, this is a football boot that's come completely out of nowhere, and as we've seen in the past, when new brands present themselves in the world of football boots, certainly in the very competitive speed boot category, is most people want nothing to do with it. Where I think with these boots, they've certainly piqued the interest of the enthusiast community, and rightfully so, because I think there's really two main reasons why these should appeal to you. Reason number one is the value for money factor, where there's no question that for what you pay, this is really the best speed boot, in that they are less expensive than every other boot in this video, retailing for $200, which still isn't cheap. But obviously, for what you pay, I think these match just about anything when it comes to peak overall performance and certainly quality of fit, materials, comfort, all of those important things. But I think for a lot of people, what really is going to make the Scudetta such an appealing product is the fact that it really does feel like the reincarnation of the 2014 Adidas F50 Adizero, which is for a lot of people the all-time greatest speed boot ever made. The material that they have in the forefoot is so soft. It's a raw synthetic that still has that nice bit of pliability to it while still providing you that barefoot feel. The texturing on the surface gives you that little bit of extra grip. It transitions into a thinner textile, which gives you that little bit of lockdown and structure without feeling restrictive. It features a deep central lacing system with a standalone tongue, so it has that little bit of tradition about it. The fit and shaping is absolutely fantastic. They nailed it there. The boots are super comfortable, and the sole plate and stud pattern definitely feels like what you would expect to find on a pair of high-end football boots. Definitely provide really aggressive traction. I personally don't think that the sole plate feels quite as special as some of the other speed boots that are currently on the market. But again, for $200, which is effectively $60 less than some of the most popular options right now, you certainly could not go wrong, which is why the Scudetta is A tier. It's one of the most popular speed boots on the market, and for good reason. The Adidas F50 Elite is about as well-rounded a product as you can possibly have, and again, I think the hype around the return of the F50 is not just about the name with these, in that this doesn't feel like they completely disregarded everything that they've been working towards with the evolution of each new X model. It carries on where those left off, but still incorporates some true F50 DNA from that OG 2010 pair in terms of how they fit, how the material moves with your foot, obviously with the stud pattern and sole plate construction, and just generally in the overall experience of the F50 being a very simple pair of speed boots compared to some of the more complex options that are currently available. I love the thin upper. It has a little bit more of that kind of raw plasticky feel, but not in a way that feels uncomfortable. The Sprint Web micro texturing on the surface gives you additional grip that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Again, the shaping, fit, and comfort, I think Adidas have absolutely nailed. The boots as a whole aren't quite as light as some of the early F50 models, which is a bit of a disappointment, but they certainly aren't heavy. They're going to be on par with most of the top end options that are currently out there. And of course, the sole plate and stud pattern, again, not as aggressive as what you'll find from some other speed boots, but it does kind of match up with what the F50 Adizero originally was when it was introduced 14 years ago. So if you were a fan of the F50 Adizero when it was in its heyday, I really don't see why you would dislike the current F50 Elite. It is easily an A-tier football boot. The made in Japan Mizuno Morelia Neo 4, whether it's the beta version that I have here or the slightly more traditional non-beta variation, is really the gold standard when it comes to overall refinement of a concept over years and years and years, where if you look at these compared to the earliest variations of the Mizuno Morelia Neo, first introduced in and around 2010, they look almost exactly the same. However, pretty much everything has been changed in one way or another, where this is a football boot that from a fit and comfort perspective is pretty much as good as it gets. In terms of making it stand out from the competition, you're getting kangaroo leather through the forefoot that, given that this is a made in Japan Mizuno product, is of the finest quality you're going to find out there in the world of football boots. It's thin, but also soft, and really gives you that touch on the ball unlike anything else. That transitions into a textile or a thin synthetic depending on which variation of the Neo 4 you opt for. If you like the one-piece upper construction with the knitted enclosure, go for the beta. If you're more of a traditionalist, go for the non-beta variation. That would personally be my preference out of the two, although both are fantastic. They're super lightweight, pretty much as light as anything. And then you get that responsive feel from the sole plate, as well as all conical studs, which again, isn't quite as aggressive as what you're gonna find from most speed boots on the market, but it is quite unique in terms of giving you that freedom to twist and pivot, as well as providing more bite than I think a lot of people would expect. They're very expensive at over $300. However, you do get what you pay for in terms of build quality as well as materials used, where these are genuinely some of the best speed boots money can buy. This is easily S tier. If raw performance is what you're after, it's really tough to beat the Puma Ultra 5 Ultimate. While it's the less expensive little brother of the much flashier Ultra 5 Carbon at $230, the Ultra 5 Ultimate with its plastic sole plate arguably feels better on feet and also seems to be more comfortable while still maintaining a fairly responsive feel. You're still getting pretty much the most aggressive stud pattern on the market, providing plenty of bite when pushing off in pretty much any direction. You add an external heel counter compared to the Carbon model, which modifies the shape in the heel in a way that I think is actually better. The shaping of the boot as a whole is almost old school Mercurial-esque in a lot of ways, where it wraps your foot very, very closely, giving you that one-to-one fit. So much better than the last couple generations of Puma Ultra, where the upper is super thin, it's soft, it's got a little bit of that sock-like element to it, and it also has that grippy texture on the surface that is super unexpected and actually kind of similar to the grip knit that you're going to find on the new generation of Mercurials, which is one of the main features of that boot that makes people so excited. You can get something very close to that for $30 less in the Ultra 5 Ultimate. For what you pay, this is pretty tough to beat, which is why the Ultra 5 Ultimate is S tier. Just when you thought Nike's done absolutely everything with the Mercurial series and there isn't anything that they could possibly do to make us interested in a new model, they go and release the Vapor 16 Elite, which doesn't necessarily give us something that we haven't seen before from Nike, but the introduction of grip knit on a pair of Mercurials in general does make these distinctly different than all past Mercurial, Vapor, or Superfly models. That extra grip on the ball by way of this grip knit material is extremely noticeable and one of those things that might not be for everybody, which is definitely worth talking about. If you're not a fan of extra grip on the ball, these probably aren't going to be your favorite. But in terms of giving you that sense of control from that little bit of friction that you get from the stickiness of this upper, paired up with the fact that it is super thin while also very responsive and wraps your foot so closely, it does give you this one-to-one connection that obviously made the Mercurials so popular in the first place, but of course with the addition of that extra grip. From a fit and comfort perspective, I think this is a huge improvement over the previous generation. The sole plate and stud pattern has also been completely reworked, where I don't necessarily think it feels that different. The big change here is more so down to the fact that because of the design changes, the 3/4 length zoom unit becomes a little bit more noticeable because of pressure distribution modifications, where I don't think it enhances the performance, but certainly from an underfoot cushion standpoint, I definitely think these feel great underfoot. The FG stud pattern is pretty much as aggressive as it's always been, despite being drastically different from the previous generation. I don't think that's a major change. And the boots also managed to be a little bit lighter than they were last year, which is always very impressive to see. For $260, they're obviously not cheap, but if you're a Mercurial fan and you've always thought to yourself, I'd love it if they just had some extra grip on the ball, that's exactly what they've given us in 2024. The Vapor 16 Elite is quite easily S tier, which of course would also mean that the Superfly 10 Elite, given that it's the exact same football boot with the addition of a collar, no changes to the fit, no changes to the ankle support, despite what a lot of people tend to believe. But if you like the idea of a mid-cut collar and you don't mind spending the $25 premium, the Superfly 10 is a fantastic option. It too is S tier. They aren't new and you don't hear much about them, which means that if you're on the market for a pair of speed boots in 2024, these probably didn't even cross your mind. But the Made in Japan Mizuno Alpha is genuinely one of the best speed boots currently on the market for so many different reasons. In terms of peak performance characteristics, they're responsive, the touch on the ball is fantastic, the fit and comfort is arguably the best of the best as far as synthetic speed boots go, period. It just wraps your foot so nicely and has great pliability. The slightly kind of sticky coating that you have to the heel liner in particular, I think is such a great feature in terms of giving you that locked in responsive sensation. The deep central lacing system allows for amazing adjustability for somebody with slightly wider feet as well. This is one of those boots that's going to work for just about everybody. They're as light as they come. The sole plate is super super responsive. The stud pattern is a lot different than what you're gonna find from a lot of options with these triangular shaped studs, but still very aggressive in terms of providing tons and tons of bite, where realistically the only downside of this football boot is going to be the fact that it's expensive at $300, but again, made in Japan build quality, made in Japan durability. So if you really want something where you can trust that you're getting what you pay for, the made in Japan Mizuno Alpha, like I said, is one of those boots that I think more people should consider because they are just that good. This is once again quite easily an S-tier football boot. For years, we've been screaming at Adidas to release Messi's actual football boots because there's always been the version we can buy and the version that he actually wears. And while I'm sure there are still some modifications to Messi's actual boots compared to these, surprise, surprise, we finally get what we ask for, and the product is pretty much as good as it gets. What makes the Messi version of the F50 Elite different from the normal variation is the upper. Instead of that normal kind of raw plasticky material, you're getting a full hybrid touch synthetic, which is technically the same as what you'll find on the Adidas Predator. However, because there's no obstructions here, it's just softer and more pliable and just genuinely one of the most pleasant uppers in the speed boot category, and also extremely unique in terms of giving you a thin feel, but also that little bit of padding. I would kind of compare this to a Mizuno Morelia Neo 4 with its kangaroo leather, but because it's one material all the way through, the touch as a whole tends to be a little bit more consistent and uniform across the entire foot, which is something that I'm personally a big fan of. You still get that grip texturing on the surface, which feels great on the ball. The central lacing system is maintained, and then you get that signature Messi burrito style tongue made from an elasticated prime knit, which also feels great. The boots as a whole are light, just like all the other F50 Elites, and you get the exact same sole plate and stud pattern as the standard Elite model, which again, maybe not as aggressive as some other speed boots, but it does kind of relate these back to those OG F50 Adizeros, which is something that I'm personally a big fan of. It's just a shame that we haven't gotten more colorway drops of the Messi F50 Elite because they've been pretty hard to come by, but I'm hoping in the future things will change, where if you are on the market for a pair of speed boots that have a little bit of that softness and almost leather-like sensation to them, the F50 Elite Messi should definitely be on your radar. It's S tier.